I'm Jake Bishop, author of Nothing, published by no one. And, I'm not sure if the camera is on, so I'm gonna talk loudly in case you can't hear me. And everyone who doesn't watch Durfee's videos is currently very, very confused. But all of you should go watch Durfee's videos, especially his Redwall review. And also, you should read his book, The Forgetting Moon. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let's talk Forgetting Moon. This is one thick book. Very floppy. So, what is it about? What makes it good? And did I have any problems with it? And kind of what type of read is it? So, this is basically, we got the world is called the Five Isles. And you have kind of 5 medium-sized continents that are relatively close together in what is, I have to say, one of the best fantasy maps I've seen, in my opinion, for a long time. I really like this map. I don't know about you. I think it kicks quite a lot of ass. I can't wait to really explore most of the world. But we are primarily, actually pretty much universally, in this kingdom right here, Golcanna, which is the last unconquered kingdom. These guys, the Sor Servier, have conquered the Windare and the Adam White. I'm pronouncing everything wrong. I don't do audiobooks, but whatever. And the leader of the Sor Servier is called the Angel Prince, who is he's supposed to be like the descendant and the heir to almost like... So religion is a huge focus in this book, and they kind of have... There's a Jesus figure who's kind of their equivalent, and the Angel Prince is supposed to basically be his relative, so he's kind of saying that he has the right to the world and should be worshipped as the one true heir, effectively, to the god figure of this world. But guess what? Some people don't quite agree with him there. Huge shock. And in the main city for Golcanna is Amadon, and that is probably where the main story kind of is centered around. And that's following Tala and Jondralin. And Tala is the younger princess, I guess, the younger sister to the current king. Jondralin is the older sister, and then you have King Jovan, who's kind of somewhat recently taken place because the previous king and queen died fighting the Angel Prince over on one of the other continents. And I'm a big fan of the family kind of dynamic between them. Jovan, the king, and the older sister very much do not get along. One relationship I really like in this, it doesn't get a huge amount of time, but I think it's great, is Tala and Jovan, because even though they're kind of, it's probably somewhat predictable that Jovan's kind of a dick. So don't expect to cheer that much for Jovan. But I really like Tala's relationship with them, because even though you're kind of cheering for Tala and you're not cheering for Jovan, they don't directly clash that much. So they actually still kind of have a really, I think, well-written sister-brother relationship. And then Jondralin and Jovan, on the other hand, do not get along at all. Tala's main thing is she's kind of the main castle that they're in has a lot of secret passages. And while going through those secret passages, she runs into a Bloodwood assassin, and kind of ends up in a game of getting blackmailed and and kind of being a pawn, but not really having a way out of it. And I like the way all the stuff she's kind of blackmailed do kind of come together, because they're kind of each of them on their own. A lot of them are just like, why the hell are you doing this? But then you start to get more and more in the picture, and it kind of starts to make sense what's really going on. And I think in general, the scheming and backstabbing in this book was very, very well done. There's some excellent foreshadowing and setup and payoff that's kind of, that I didn't really see coming at all, but in hindsight kind of clicked. And I love things like that. And then Jondralin, on the other hand, does less sneaking and is very much very, very confident I guess we could say. She really wants to be like a warrior princess, but isn't particularly good at being a warrior princess. And she's certainly confident in her abilities and very, very bullheaded. And if you don't like reading characters who make foolish decisions, you might have some issues with some of these characters. I like foolish decisions. I think when they're in character, which they are, I think they're a lot more interesting than perfectly logical, rational decisions, because if every character makes super rational decisions, it's very unlikely you will have conflict. And then there are a couple other kind of like point of views and characters in there, but then the other main point of view, who I think has the most time, is Nail, who is shockingly an orphan with mysterious parentage who does blue-collar labor, and he has a mentor. One thing that is slightly different is his mentor, Shawcroft, is kind of a dick. He really drew the short end of the mentor stick when it came to, the guy who's kind of his foster parent and taking care of him, really is an ass. Bloody Shawcroft. Anyway, Shawcroft's not the best foster parent that we've ever ran into. And he kind of, it's kind of, that part of it is very classic fantasy, in that, orphan, mysterious origins, everyone thinks he's a bastard, doesn't feel he's belong, the world kind of shows up at his doorstep, but I thought it was really well written. And Nail, I think all the characters in this have a distinctive voice, and one thing that I think really shows Durfee's ability with voice is the chapter preludes, which are some of the best chapter preludes I've read. So all the chapter preludes have a bit from an in-world religious text, but there are multiple in-world religious texts, and even though they all do a really good job of feeling like archaic religious texts, they all have their own voice. And it's really impressive that's done. There's definitely some foreshadowing layered in there. And it was one of those books where I had no urge to skip the pre-chapter epigraphs. They were great. And I definitely recommend paying attention to those pre-chapter epigraphs. And there are kind of three main religious texts that get followed. The one is of Raijon, which is the one that basically says the angel prince, the descendant of Leijon, who's the Jesus figure. We'll just say what it is the current kind of should be worshipped. Then there's the Way and Truth of Leijon, which is kind of the primary religious text of Golcanna. And then I forget the name of it. Something with Mother Mia, which is kind of like the side sect of Leijon that kind of is saying this is the super secret backstory that the other book won't tell you. And I gotta say, in general, the way, I guess this isn't more so much for what it's about, but we're gonna say it anyways, the way the religion was built in this is some of the best that I've seen. I love the way Durfee shows the good and the bad of religion. It doesn't feel like someone's selling you that religion is awesome, and it also doesn't feel like someone's telling you that religion is terrible. You really see both sides of it, and it does a wonderful, wonderful job of that, in my opinion. I kind of especially like it. There's one section in the middle where back to back, you really see the good and the bad, and I really love that kind of juxtaposition. So I have to give it serious praise for that. And I also will say there's kind of one other main point of view character who is Galt, who is part of the invading army with the Angel Prince Eros. And Galt is very much trained himself to feel apathy towards murder and death. And it's almost a little bit frightening. Because at first when you meet Galt, he's kind of like, yeah, this seems like an okay dude. He, doesn't seem like that outrageous. But then, people get killed, and he's just in, the same mood, and you're just like, oh no. And I think he's probably my favorite character in this book, and he's definitely the one I'm the most excited to see where he goes. I really love where his story kind of ended in this book. I'm very much looking forward to more Galt. He's kind of like the guy where he gets in a duel, and there's no, messing with the person. He's like, oh, I'm in a duel, someone I don't really want, oh, well, I guess I gotta kill him. And he kills him. It's like, oh, shit. All right, Galt. you're a little bit scary just from not really, your apathy is pretty frightening. And so, as I mentioned, what makes it good? I also want to say, so obviously the characters that I've mentioned and the world building. I also want to say the writing itself, I think, is very, very good. I think it's very strong in terms of prose, both in terms of description, dialogue, and internal conflict. It's very, very readable. Well, also, as I say a lot, it's very, like, active descriptions. So a lot of the chapters, see if I open to a random chapter if it has a description or something. A lot of the chapters start with, like, descriptions, for example, but crabs scuttled among the heap of dead bodies as seagulls cried above, their shadows weaving over the rippled, blood-stained sand and the waves rolling ashore. Yeah, that's the type of book this is, by the way. Also, I should mention, very much rated R. This is, I don't know if it's considered grimdark, but it's one that's borderline grimdark. Don't expect, characters who are particularly virtuous, terrible things happen. It's very much graphic. You should go in expecting this to be an R-rated fantasy story. If you go in otherwise, you're gonna be in for a shock. But writing-wise, very, very strong for prose. Not like the best I've ever read, but for a debut novel, very, very, very strong for prose. I also like the way the world building was delivered. I'm a fan of it, but I'm a fan of Robert Jordan. There are some info dumps in this book. I thought they were always very interesting info dumps because of how interesting the world is and how well it ties into the story. But expect something to be world building heavy when you read this. You will be hit with a lot of world building, but it's really, really good world building. I think he's outlined a really interesting history. He's kind of taken some of the classic fantasy races, and I want to say made them a bit more like heavy metal. People describe this as heavy metal fantasy, and I see where that's coming from. Where it's like, you've got your high elves and your dwarfs, but they all kind of feel like, they don't feel like rehashes of like Tolkien elves or Tolkien dwarfs. And this also has mer people, and the mer people are as intimidating and scary as they should be. They are not like cute, they're horrifying, and it's great. It's really well written, and I want more. The way symbols are used in this book is also great in terms of foreshadowing. It was just a really, really well executed, impressive book. I guess for cons, if you are not into something super world building heavy, this just probably won't be for you. Also, it is very, very low magic fantasy. There are some magic items, but very low magic fantasy. One of the lower magic fantasy books I've read in a long time. Which I guess this isn't really a pro or a con. This is just so you know what to expect. And one thing I will say for a con, there's kind of one moment near the end in the climax that I thought was somewhat unsatisfying, where it was very realistic and true to character, but it was just kind of like what could have been a pretty hard-hitting emotional moment because of the way it went down. It was just slightly anticlimactic. That's a pretty minor qualm, though. Like, it's not a serious problem. And I could see some people having problems with, there are characters in this book who are sexist, and their dialogue will reflect that, because Durfee is very good at having people's personality reflected in his dialogue. So if you have a sexist, when the person is going to say sexist things. I think this has probably caused some low ratings. I think it's just good dialogue. But I don't know, some people seem to not like that. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there are sexist characters, but that's just, like, character traits. It's not even, like, that many of the, like, people you're supposed to think are good anyways. But be that as it may, I don't really have many cons for this book. It was really kick-ass and well-rounded. I think if you are a fan of this feels like the 3 series I think that I could recommend it to fans would be The Wheel of Time, A Song of Ice and Fire. I think the kind of type of characters and like who they are reminded me of A Song of Ice and Fire. Also some of the scheming, but kind of with RJ writing style and like the way RJ handles prophecy. And then I've also heard it compared to Faithful and the Fallen. I kind of get that for Nail's point of views in the start, I actually think it kind of reminded me more of kind of Wheel of Time plus A Song of Ice and Fire divided by 2. I don't mean that in terms of it being derivative of those. I mean stylistically. In terms of it's kind of the style of characters you'd see in A Song of Ice and Fire with the writing style more similar to Wheel of Time. And I love A Song of Ice and Fire characters, and I love Robert Jordan writing. So those things work out for me. And I think I would recommend this to fans of either of those series. And there's not a huge amount of series that, like the 2 series that I think it reminds me of is both Wheel of Time and A Song of Ice and Fire, because those 2 things are pretty different in my head. But I would honestly recommend this to fans of either, and I would recommend this to most fantasy fans, unless you're someone who just, like, I guess, doesn't like more grimdark stuff. It's not full grimdark, but it's more grimdark than most. Or if you primarily only like high magic fantasy. But other than that, I give this a very strong recommend and an 8.5 out of 10.